In this lesson, we're going to talk about GoZ. GoZ is found under the tool menu here. You'll notice there's a little GoZ button and then a button for all and a button for visible. Now, what GoZ does is it creates a live link between ZBrush and another 3D application. If we go to Preferences and go to GoZ, here you can see we have the ability to change our settings for what programs are being invoked. So if we come down here, we have Path to Maya, Path to Photoshop, Path to Cinema 4D, Paths to Sculptress. So these are the paths to the GoZ-enabled applications. So if I were to click Path to Maya, it's going to ask me to establish the path to Maya where it's installed on my computer. So I can browse to it or select the path that it detected or click Not Installed. And I'm not going to change that, so I'm going to escape out of it. You also have the ability to import new GoZ meshes as subtools of the current Z tool, and that can be really handy if you want to take something into Maya and change it and bring it back in as a subtool rather than bringing it into the existing Z tool. We'll talk about that in a little bit when we change topology in Maya and then transfer it back into ZBrush. Here we can clear the cache files. And the cache files, a lot of the ZBrush plugins use cache files. For example, Decimation Master does. And if you clear your cache files, it can help resolve any sort of strange behaviors you might be experiencing. So if you get unexpected results using GoZ, come over here and clear the cache files. You can also force reinstallation of the GoZ application. So if you are still having problems, you can force a reinstall, and you can update all of your application paths. So we're going to use Maya in this particular demonstration. Here we've got our Alien Z tool that we worked out in the UV mapping chapter for UV Master. You may remember that this particular Z tool has a texture map in the texture slot. It also has a normal map in the normal map slot. Now, these texture slots are associated with this Z tool. It's not the global texture slot. Something you have here isn't going to matter. What matters is what we have under the Z tool menu for normal map and texture map. And you can also do this with displacement map. Now, the reason I point these out is because GoZ, when I press this button, or press all or press visible, what it's going to do is it's going to take the Z tool, step down to level 1, export that, and then export the associated maps, load it up into Maya, and then set up the shader networks so these maps will correctly display. It takes all the guesswork and a lot of work out of getting your work out of ZBrush into Maya and checking it and seeing how it looks. Now, if you are interested in doing pipeline work, I do recommend you learn how to set up your own shader networks. And there's fantastic introduction to Maya on Gnomon Workshop. And there's a whole bunch of tutorials on here that you have access to, which goes into Maya in depth. But we're going to touch on this because I want to show you this tool. It's not really even a plugin. It's integrated into ZBrush. I want to show it to you in action. So what I will do is I will click all, and that's going to take all of my subtools, export them, and then bring them into ZBrush. And I'd like to point out as well, if I select the eyes subtool and go to texture map, I also have a texture map for the eyes. And you'll notice that I actually did use AUV tiling on this just for the sake of speed. So we have a texture map on the eyes, so when the eyes transfer over, the color will transfer with them. So let's go ahead now and click all, and this is going to, when I click this button, it's going to automatically load Maya because that is set as my GoZ application, and it will load Maya and it will load up the models and textures in Maya. So let's go ahead and click that and we'll see the result. And here in Maya, you can see that the models have transferred over. We zoom in, you can see that we've got both subtools. And if we select the mesh, you see that we are on the lowest subdivision level, and the normals are automatically smoothed. Now, if I open up the attribute editor, I can use Control A for that. Select the mesh for the head, And if we just come over here, you see we've got a Lambert shader assigned, and there is a color map, and there is a bump map node. So if we go downstream on color, here you can see that it is the texture map that has been exported from ZBrush because we had a texture map in the texture swatch. So if we go back to bump mapping, downstream here you see we have the normal map assigned. Now, let's go ahead and view this actually in the viewport. We do that by going to render, making sure we're set to viewport 2.0, and go to shading and turn on hardware texturing. Now you can see it shows us our color map and it shows us our displacement, or our normal mapping, I should say. I'm going to change the type here to blend so we get a little bit of a specular shine on there. It makes it a bit easier to see some of that detail. Now you might notice that you get a seam here. The fix for that is to go downstream from bump mapping and change color space here to raw. And then that removes that and gives you the look that you're expecting. Now you see we get all that detail in our normal map, but if I click the mesh, you see it's still level 1. There's no geometry here to actually carry all that detail. That is entirely a result of the normal mapping. If I go to create lights, and let's create a directional light. And let's go ahead and we'll scale the light up so we can properly see the gizmo for it. And then we rotate this light. And I want to actually see the lighting on here, so I will actually press the number 7. Now I can move this light around and I can see the light interactively. And as you see, as the light moves, the surface normals impact the highlight and shadow. So it gives us the impression of a highly detailed surface when in fact it's a normal map on level 1. So GoZ is really powerful in that you can, any map that you have in the texture slot will come over and be automatically set up for you. You'll already have a material node here with all the maps connected. Were you to connect a displacement map, it would do the same. All you have to do is have that map enabled in the texture swatch for either normal map, displacement map, or texture map, and GoZ will transfer it over. Another thing that we can do in GoZ is we can actually have a live link with ZBrush. So let's say, for example, I wanted to take the head for some reason and maybe move it up in space. We'll move it up here. We'll leave the eyes where they are because we don't want the, we want it to be clear that this is moved. Now watch this. There is a shelf button that is installed with GoZ in Maya. And this is the GoZ button. And if I click that, this will take my model, the changes, and then transport them back across to ZBrush. So any changes that I make in here you see, they transfer over to ZBrush. So the model has now moved up. So if I undo that, and let's go back over to Maya, and I'll undo it in Maya. And we can also do things like this. If I were to, let's say, select an edge loop here, and go to edge ring utilities, edge ring and split. So I have now effectively changed my topology. I will do another GoZ. And ZBrush will take that new level 1, bring it back in. Now you'll get a pop-up menu and you see it here, import mesh. The topology of the mesh has changed. Press yes to transfer the high resolution details to the modified mesh. So what this is doing is Maya is sending back a modified mesh. Now in ZBrush, at any time you import a new topology into your subdivision level 1, ZBrush will detect that and it will automatically try and reproject your subdivision levels onto that new topology. So it's quite a handy tool. So I'll just click OK. I'll click yes on this, and ZBrush will import that new mesh. It subdivides it to the same number of polygons as the model currently is, and then it remaps the high resolution details through projection. So this might take a little bit of time depending on how many changes you make. You could go into Maya and you could add horns, for example. extrude faces out with horns, and then click the GoZ button and transfer it right back into ZBrush. And those changes will update, and you will retain your subdivision levels. Sometimes there'll be little areas that you may have to smooth out and fix, but that's a small price to pay for what it was in the olden days before GoZ and before the ability to update topology, where we really were stuck if we had to change the topology on a Z tool. Now that has completed, and if we zoom in, you'll see that it ends up masking everything that was unchanged. So if I control click and drag, it'll clear the mask. And I'll step back down to level 1 and then go into frame mode. And if you look, you see there's that extra edge loop. So you can make topological changes in Maya and then GoZ transfer them back over into ZBrush. So let's try something a little different. We'll go back over to Maya. And this time we will grab a couple faces here. I'm going to go to Symmetry and turn on Object X. And I'm just going to select a few faces here. This one, this one, this one, and this one. And let's go to Edit Mesh, Extrude. Oops, having a little bit of a draw artifact there. Here we go. And we can extrude these out. And let's go to our channel box. Let's scale this down. Let's rotate around, local rotate around Z. There we go. So we'll get these sort of extra antenna here. So there we've got another extrusion. Now, of course, that's going to change our UV mapping, and so our texturing will be stretching there. So that's what we end up getting. However, the important thing to note is that we have changed the topology even further. So now I'll click GoZ, and then ZBrush will come back over. And once again, we get the pop-up menu. Let me drag it over on the screen. Import mesh. The topology of the mesh has changed, so I will click yes. And what ZBrush is going to do is once again import that and then remap the high-resolution details to the new geometry. And there we go. Let's turn off frame mode so we can see this more clearly. You can see that it has masked everything that's unchanged, and the unmasked areas are the new bits of geometry. So this allows me to very easily step down my subdivision levels, maybe do a little bit of smoothing here. I'm going to undo that and make sure my X symmetry is turned on. There we go. And we'll do a little bit of smoothing. And I'll take the inflate brush. Maybe we'll inflate the tips a little bit. So it's just another set of kind of antenna here. I can clear the mask and then step back up my subdivision levels. And there we've got a new addition to our mesh. Now, it doesn't have its own polygroup. Let me go to texture map. If you do find that you can't see your polygroups, turn texture mapping off. And now you can see your polygroups. So if I undo back to the masking, Control click on the background that inverts the mask so the new geometry is now masked. Turn texture off. And if I go to polygroup, we have a button for group masked. So now the newly generated geometry is masked, or is polygrouped because it was masked. Now you see that we missed a couple faces down there. So if I isolate that polygroup and then go to the visibility menu and click grow, I can grow that visibility. I can choose to grow it down to the very, very base, or I can shrink it so it's just down to that edge ring there. Go to polygroups and then select group visible. If I want them both to have different polygroups, I go to auto group. Control shift click on the background, clear my mask. So GoZ is more than just a quick way of setting up your scenes for render. It's actually a very powerful live link with all the modeling tools available inside of ZBrush, which you can then leverage in, all the modeling tools available in Maya, which you can then leverage in ZBrush. So that concludes this look at GoZ. So GoZ is more than just a method of setting up your scenes for render. It's also an extremely powerful live link that allows you to leverage all the modeling tools available in Maya inside of ZBrush. So that concludes this look at GoZ. I hope you've enjoyed this and you can see how you can utilize this in your own workflow. And I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.